In the movies, we see people betray their own kind all the time, but sadly, it's also happening in the trans community. Take Blaire White, for example.
Okay, I'm gonna let you go on, but you might want to keep Blaire White's name out of your mouth. I know you fancy yourself to be a food critic, but you might be biting off more than you can chew with this one.
She is a trans woman, albeit a conservative one. But instead of advocating for change or pushing people to be more accepting with her very large platform.
Now I'm going to interrupt really quick because I think this is where LilyTino and a lot of other trans influencers and activists get it wrong. Blaire White doesn't have to advocate for change because Blaire White is change. No pun intended. And I interrupt right here specifically because if you saw the last video I did where I talked about LilyTino, there's a point where LilyTino talks about the fact that going into women's bathrooms is LilyTino's version of advocating.
This is what it is being an advocate.
For change.
My goal in taking those pictures was to normalize trans women using the women's room.
But at this point, nothing for or on behalf of the trans community is going to come from pushing. Actually, it's the constant pushing that has led to the general public having no choice but to finally push back. And I've said this before, and I've had a few activist types get mad at me for it, but I really do feel that people like LilyTino really should sort themselves out privately before starting to advocate or speak publicly. Because I think what a lot of these people would find if they were truly trans, because there's some debate over whether or not LilyTino is truly trans. I personally lean towards LilyTino is AGP at best, autogynephile if you're not familiar, look it up. But when it comes to true trans people, I think what a lot of them would find is that in the beginning of your transition, you're going to be very, what I call rah about it, where you want everybody to cheer you on. And I think that's because they're just learning to accept it. So they're really trying to assert themselves towards the rest of the world, kind of in a weird sort of like, I'm going to force the world to do for me what I wouldn't do for myself for all the years leading up to my transition, if that makes sense. And once they really settle into who they are, what they end up discovering for themselves is that you don't need everybody else's approval to be what you are. And that once you get comfortable, you accept what you are better than you do at the beginning. Because in the beginning, you think you're accepting yourselves by saying, I am a woman. The world needs to see me as a woman. That's where you do yourself a disservice. And that's where your friends do you a disservice when your friends are like, you are a woman. You're the same as any other woman. And I think that does lead to a lot of the depression that we see with a lot of trans people, and even a lot of the self-delete that we hear about when it comes to trans people. Because you're constantly trying to be this thing that you will never be. Where if you just relax and accept yourself for what you are, then you have a better chance of being happy because you're not constantly trying to attain this goal that is just biologically, medically, and even mentally unattainable. And that's a part of why I think Blaire White is such a good example. Because if you ever pay attention to Blaire White or Blaire White's content, what you'll notice about Blaire White is that Blaire White is very honest about the fact that she is not a woman, she will never be a woman, and it was never in her head that she would be a woman.
I was never under any impression or misconception that me transitioning would make me a woman.
Blaire White is very clear about the fact that she is a trans woman.
Never was there any part of me that was like, this will make me a biological woman.
Like not too long ago, I was scrolling through stories on Instagram and I saw a story where she had captioned it something like, it's actually crazy to think that I'm a man. But if you've ever hung out with Blaire White, when you're talking to her, her energy, the way that she interacts with you, the way that she presents herself, even the way that she looks, nothing about her is giving man. So it's very easy to address Blaire White in she, her pronouns. It's very easy to see Blaire as a woman, even though she is, by her own admission, a trans woman, and there's nothing insulting about saying any of this. So what I'm getting at is, while you and others will try to act like Blaire is supposed to be involved with this push for normalization and be an advocate for the trans community when you're doing such a horrible job of it yourself, makes absolutely no sense at all.
Blaire throws trans people under the bus in order to be seen as one of the good ones by conservatives.
Actually, I would argue that you throw trans people under the bus for a couple of dollars. So when you say that Blaire throws trans people under the bus to be seen as one of the good ones, that tells me that you not only have never met Blaire White, but also that you've never consumed any of her content, because nothing about her is trying to at all show anybody she's one of the good ones. Blaire isn't putting on any kind of show in order to have people see her a particular way. And for those of you that don't know, I've hung out with Blaire a couple of times. I really respect and like Blaire because I consider Blaire to be the natural progression and evolution of the girls that I came up with, because the girls I came up with were a lot like Blaire in the way that they didn't care what the rest of the world thought of them. They weren't trying to be one of the good ones. As a consequence, though, a lot of the world really did get opened up to seeing trans people as regular people by meeting people like my friends, by meeting people like Blaire White. Because if you ever hang out with any of those kinds of trans people, which aren't transgender by my standards, they're transsexual is what they are, what you'll notice is because they're just being themselves, it puts you at ease, and it sort of acts like true activism or true advocacy without that even being their intention. Like, it really is a situation where they just make you so comfortable with who they are as people that you're just like, yeah, why would I care if this person dresses this particular way or identifies this particular way if they're not acting like a creep or forcing me to lie to them? And the other thing that you should notice about Blaire White versus yourself is that when it comes to LilyTino, you are constantly going to the restaurants, getting misgendered.
Did you call me sir?
And having your feelings hurt.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Yes,
Ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am, sorry, my bad. And
Because you have this idea that you're a woman.
I'm a woman, so I'm going to use the women's bathroom.
So naturally, the rest of the world is supposed to see you as a woman.
I use she, her pronouns. I'm not sir.
But nobody sees you as a woman, so you get misgendered, and then you completely get broken in the process.
It's just always like a knife. It always hurts every single time.
Where a person like Blaire, who, like I said, I've hung out with in very heteronormative circumstances, including on the broy streets of Austin, 6th Street, more specifically. If you're familiar with 6th Street, you can't get more broy than that. Nobody has ever misgendered her or disrespected her in my presence. There will be people that come up to her that know her from the internet, and they'll be very sweet with her. I've never even seen anybody be disrespectful about her opinions or say that they didn't like what she does online. If anything, people will come up and be like, hey, I love your channel, things like that. And I would say that that's probably in large part because she doesn't walk in with any expectation, because she doesn't push anything on people. It's just naturally given to her. But you, on the other hand, make an entire career out of rage baiting and making the general public think that they don't like trans people. You make people think that trans people are all creeps. You make people think trans people are all trying to force themselves into women's spaces. You have become the face of everything people don't like about trans people, or they think they don't like about trans people, which you're able to do in pretty impressive numbers because of the number of views that you're getting. And the whole reason that you do that is because you want to make some money off of TikTok, which I know with the millions of views you're getting, you are making some really good money. But at the same time, think about the amount of damage that you're actually doing to the trans community. Think about the way that you personally have set the trans community back. Think about what your most recent situation with Disney and taking pictures in the women's bathroom has done to everyday trans people that were just trying to fly under the radar and be treated like everybody else. And then think about the level of damage that her trying to come off as one of the good ones does compared to a person like you that has made the trans community look absolutely horrible just to avoid going back to regular work. And then tell me which one of the two of you think is more evil. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Okay, so not too long ago, TikTok's most obnoxious trans advocate, LilyTino, aka Buffalo Grills, aka I got my cake pops removed,
I got my cake pops removed,
aka Pennywise, had the nerve to talk about Blaire White. And I had planned to do a video about it at that time, but then a million different things came up and I didn't get to do it. And so the other day I was on YouTube and I saw a short where Blaire White addressed it herself.
I'm glad that you're distancing yourself because this is only a good look for me and other transsexuals who want nothing to do with you.
And it reminded me that I wanted to do this video, so I decided to do it now. And for anybody that may want to jump down in the comments and think that I'm trying to white knight for Blaire, Blaire doesn't need a white knight and I'm not white, so there's that. I just really do respect Blaire for actually being able to walk through the fire and be the person that she's been all this time and stick to her guns, literally and figuratively. And I think that more from the community should acknowledge that and should be willing to say that, no, you're wrong, LilyTino, and you are not going to convince us that Blaire White is anything but what she is. And maybe some of the younger trans people coming up can actually take from the way that Blaire lives her life that just because you're dealing with gender dysphoria doesn't mean you have to be some pushy, cross-dressing whack job begging for everybody's approval. And a person like Blaire White is, to me, more in the spirit of what every trans person I knew coming up was like, in that they were just trying to live their lives and they weren't trying to push an agenda or force anything on anybody. Where a person like LilyTino, who falls more under the queer umbrella, which a lot of people will ask what queer is. The way that queer always was when I was coming up was always the more militant side. And in my experience with the queer community, queer was its own thing and they wanted to be more in your face. And that's more where LilyTino falls, is under the queer umbrella. And if you don't know the meaning of the word queer, the definition of queer, if you look it up, is odd or strange. Well, if you're identifying as being odd or strange, and that's where you want to be, is considered odd or strange, then you can't get mad at the rest of society when they treat you like you're something that's odd and strange. To me, to expect anything else when you identify as odd and strange is odd and strange. But anyway, I have a bit more to say on this one, so everybody, if you can, like, comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers. We're actually doing great on that. We just passed 86,000. Thank you all very much. When you hit the subscribe button, make sure you click the bell and select all notifications so that you know every time I upload. Now let's get on with it.
In the movies, we see people betray their own kind all the time, but sadly, it's also happening in the trans community. Take Blaire White, for example. She is a trans woman, albeit a conservative one. But instead of advocating for change or pushing people to be more accepting with her very large platform, Blaire throws trans people under the bus in order to be seen as one of the good ones by conservatives. For example, Blaire is on the record saying that trans kids don't exist.
There is no such thing as a transgender child, and I say that as a transgender adult.
Which is simply not true.
Actually, Blaire is 100% correct on that. A lot of times what are considered trans children will end up growing out of it naturally if you just leave them alone. And if you were to ask the average gay person about that, I think that they would tell you that in a lot of cases dealt with some sort of gender dysphoria when they were young, because they were raised to believe that if you aren't attracted to the opposite sex, then you probably are the opposite sex. And then if you couple that with mannerisms that maybe make it so you don't fit in with the other boys or the other girls, depending on what you are, and then you add that to maybe a little bit of feeling ostracized by the other boys, then it'll make you have a lot of questions. And since your young mind is trying to process all of that, sometimes it'll give you an answer that is incorrect. And like I said, there are a lot of us that have dealt with that. And I know people would say that that's anecdotal. Well, if you look at studies, like there was a recent study that was done not too long ago. It was a Dutch study, and they tracked children from the age of 10 to 26. And it was like 2,772, going off memory right now, which isn't the best idea, but I think it was 2,772 children that they had tracked over that 16-year period. And 78% of them said they never had gender dysphoria, but 19% of them did. But for that 19%, it went away on its own, where with 2%, they continued to experience gender dysphoria as they got older. So when you add the anecdotal, and then you also add what's been shown in more recent studies, like the one that I cited and others, I think that it's important for us not to put any labels at all on children, administering puberty blockers or making surgical changes to children, all that stuff. No, why should we be labeling and doing that to young people when research and life experience is telling us that that doesn't always turn out to be permanent? So I 100% agree with Blaire when she says that there are no trans children. And I feel like people like LilyTino or the activist want us to believe that there is such a thing as a trans child, is because they think that that in some weird way validates what they are, gives it a little more credence to say, look, if it can happen in young people, it can definitely happen in me. Which I fully do understand that there are people that deal with gender dysphoria, and it can be a very serious thing. But I don't think that we should be pushing that on children. So when Blaire says that there's no such thing as trans children, she is 100% correct, in my opinion.
And if you're thinking that that's a weird take for a trans person to have, I agree with you. Her being trans gives the take some weird legitimacy so that conservatives can point to it and say, hey, look at this. Even a trans person thinks that trans people are crazy.
Okay, first off, everybody's crazy. Whether it's a little bit or a lot of bit, everybody is crazy. So let's take that off the table right there. But I think that it is very brave of Blaire to actually say the things that she's saying, because she knows that she's going to get backlash. You have to remember that Blaire White has been talking about this stuff for at least the last 10 years. Blaire White's opinions have only become popular and accepted in maybe the last 2. Before that, she was just getting a bunch of hate. So when LilyTino is saying she threw other trans people under the bus and made it seem like they're crazy and like that was some sort of strategy, if Blaire White wanted everybody to like her, what Blaire would have done is echoed everything that the trans activists have been saying for the last 10 years and known that she was lying and giving bad advice and possibly leading children down a very destructive road, which, as I've already said, I think will lead to more self-delete. I think will lead to more mental health problems, because nothing's got to be worse than making a bunch of surgical changes to yourself and making it so that your body will never run the way that it was supposed to run or develop the way that it was supposed to develop, and then realizing it was a mistake and having to not only deal with what you're going to have to deal with medically or what you're going to have to deal with physically in trying to reverse course, but also the social consequences, because that's where the trans community really does disappoint me, because the trans community will really accept other trans people for as long as they identify as trans. But should they decide to detransition, should they decide that that's not the right road for them, and should they try to warn others because it turned out not to be right for them, and they knew everything they had gone through and everything that they're currently going through, suddenly the trans community sees them as public enemy number one. So now they have no friends, no support system. They've done all these things to their bodies that have had adverse effects, and they have zero support system from the community that claims so much to love them. And that, to me, is absolutely evil that the trans community does that to people. Because in my opinion, if you loved them when they were trans, you should love them when they're detrans. And even if they're saying that since it didn't turn out to be the right road for them, that other people might want to be a bit more cautious in making these decisions when they're too young to understand the ramifications of these decisions, to me, is what being an elder or what going through certain life experiences is sometimes good for, is so that you can warn others, or you can hopefully help other people at least give it more thought than they might have given it had they not heard from somebody that's actually lived it.
Now, it's worth pointing out the irony that the conservatives who use Blaire as ammunition against the trans community will never accept Blaire as a woman.
Well, why would they accept Blaire as a woman? Blaire doesn't claim to be a woman. So why would it be important to Blaire that people see her as something that she doesn't see herself as? Ideally, what we're all going for, in case you don't know, LilyTino, and this goes for gay, straight, bi, trans, whatever you are, what we were all trying to get at before everything went off the rails and everything became some sort of badge of honor or some sort of victim status you could live in for the rest of your lives. What we were all going for was to be seen as people, was for people to see us as individuals. Like, yeah, I am gay, and I will speak from a gay perspective, and I will talk about being the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. But really, in my actual life, all I want anybody to see me as is another human being. And when it comes to Blaire specifically, and you addressing that, another thing that I think Blaire does that is so important is that she acknowledges that gender dysphoria is a mental condition, or I think she's referred to it specifically as a mental illness. And she's also talked about the fact that she would like to destigmatize the term mental illness, or at least like to see mental illness destigmatized. So again, I don't know how you think this is a bad thing for Blaire, that she accepts herself enough that she doesn't expect the world to see her in a way that she doesn't even see herself. But I'm really feeling like you've never seen any Blaire White content. You just knew that she was a big enough creator that if you mentioned her, you would get a bunch of views.
Deep down, Blaire understands this, but she just doesn't care, because conservatives will give her a free pass from harassment and discrimination in return for selling out her own people.
If Blaire White wanted a free pass from harassment and discrimination, Blaire would have kept her mouth shut about being trans. Because if you watch Blaire's early YouTube videos, she looked feminine enough that nobody would have ever questioned it. It wouldn't have been a real issue. And then once she got her facial feminization surgery, not trying to be shady, LilyTino, but when is your facial feminization going to enter the chat? But that aside, once she got her facial feminization, and if you look at her now, you would just assume that she's a woman. Nobody's going to think anything else of it. So if she wanted the free pass that you're talking about, she just wouldn't have said anything about it and would have just lived a quiet, private life.
And it's a shame, because she's scared just like the rest of us.
Another huge hint that you know nothing about Blaire White. That is one way that I would never, ever describe Blaire White as being scared. Like I said, we've been on the broy streets of Austin. Nothing about her was at all scared or timid or skittish or jumpy or any of what you're trying to make it seem like. Blaire is not living in fear of anything. Besides, have you seen her gun collection? Nothing to fear there. But even without that, she's just not, what are you talking about, scared?
And Blaire, if you're watching this, know that you don't have to grovel to the powers that be.
Like, you're getting more and more ridiculous. And I almost feel like this is an exercise in gaslighting. Like, you're trying to make this video to make it seem like Blaire is a particular way that she's just not. And also you're trying to convince Blaire through your video that she's going through these things that she's not going through. Because Blaire doesn't grovel. If Blaire had wanted to grovel to anybody, or the people that have asked Blaire to grovel are the LGBTQ and the trans community. They want Blaire to say things a particular way and do things a particular way because they know that Blaire would be a huge asset to their cause if she would just say the things that they want her to say. But Blaire would never do that Because one of the things that I respect the most about Blaire is that what you see from her on her channel or in interviews or on any of the various podcasts that she's been on, Blaire White is Blaire White all the time. Blaire White is one of the most genuine people. What you see is what you get with Blaire White. So if you're hearing her say it on her channel or anywhere else, that's the same thing you're going to hear from her when you talk to her person to person. And there's no part of her that's ever groveling. And this, what you're doing right now, this technique is something I'm very familiar with because I've had a lot of people from the LGBTQ community do it with me because I'm gay MAGA. And they'll be like, they'll never accept you the way you are. And it's like, we're great. And plus, what makes you think that I'm looking for their acceptance? Like, I don't have those issues where I'm constantly looking for anybody's approval. So there's that. And then there's also the self-hating route. You hate yourself, and that's the reason that you want these people to like you so much. And it's like, I do not hate myself. Technically, I don't even hate you. I just think you're incredibly misguided. And I think that because you want so badly for everybody to accept you, because that is, even with the defiance, the behavior LilyTino gives is very much failed pick me. Like, they really want everybody to accept them for what they want to be or what they see themselves as, but that's not really happening, and it's never going to happen. So instead, they try to turn that into seeming like it's empowerment, when if you pay attention and you really tune in, you'll see that this person just really, really wants to belong. And in wanting to belong so much, they have to find flaws with people that truly are confident, because in order to accept that Blaire is right in this situation, that would mean that LilyTino would have to in turn accept that LilyTino has been wrong about everything LilyTino has been saying this far. And if LilyTino were to do that, I think LilyTino, even though they would get far less engagement on social media, I think they personally would live a much happier life. But what you'll end up finding out with a person like LilyTino, again, versus a person like Blaire White, is that you can completely take trans away from Blaire White and she'll still be an entertaining person. She'll still be worth watching. If you take the rage bait away from LilyTino and the fact that LilyTino is trans away from LilyTino, I'm sure you'll be left with a very, very boring person that nobody wants to pay attention to. So, rather than just be healthy about it and accept that Blaire White just plain has it more on the ball than LilyTino does, LilyTino has to try to convince the world that Blaire White is wrong so that LilyTino can continue that grift.
We can create a safer future if we just work together. Now hush, my movie's starting.
What makes you think that Blaire wants to be a part of your we? That would be my first question. And the other thing is, not only do I think that Blaire should not ever work with a person like you in any way, which thankfully, like she said at the beginning, she's not looking to at all be associated with a person like you. But I think that if Blaire keeps doing what she's doing and just stays the person that she is right now, of course continues to evolve, but in being true to herself, in that way, staying the person that Blaire is, I think Blaire will one day, if she chooses to be, kind of be able to be a leader in what will end up being the trans community, because what's going on right now with trans is going to completely fold. I have full faith that eventually that's going to completely fall because it's not yielding good results. It's not giving people more rights. It's not giving people more freedom. It's not making trans people happier. None of the intended effects are happening from what the trans community is doing right now. But if the trans community were to recalibrate and consider taking on more of the thinking of like a Blaire White, of an Eden the Doll, of a Morgan DuPont. And the reason I mention all the trans women in those examples is because that's where most of the strife seems to be coming from, is from trans women or people that identify as trans women. It's not coming from a lot of the trans men, even though some do try to go through it every once in a while. It's usually trans women we hear about. It's usually trans women that we think of when we hear about trans being a problem or where there's any kind of debate when it comes to trans. But I think if more people would pay attention to people like the ones that I just mentioned, I think that they would be seen in a more positive light. I think that they would have a better chance of figuring out exactly how they can integrate into society in a way that didn't seem bullish, in a way that didn't seem insulting, in a way that didn't seem threatening to women. And I think that even though it would take some actual adjustment in what they've been being fed so far, and by what they have been being fed, I mean the trans people that have bought into what it is the community has been selling them, which I've always said was going to be a losing strategy. But I think that if they were to let go of some of that and actually adopt what some of the creators that I'm talking about have been mentioning and have been talking about, I think that not only would they have a better result as far as the outside world went, I think they would also have a better result as far as the way they felt about themselves. And I think we would have better outcomes when it comes to the overall mental health of these people. Anyway, that's where I'm at on it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you want to see a video about a recent hands-free hate crime, click the link on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.